The ground does not warn you, it just stops behaving like ground. In a small farming village in western China, roughly 4,000 years ago, a woman is inside a house made of packed earth and timber, holding a small child close. Outside, the earth begins to shake. Not gently, walls crack. Roof beams groan and start to give way. Somewhere nearby, a river that has always minded its own business is starting to break its banks. She doesn't run. She wraps her arms around the child instead, pulls them in tight, and waits. That moment never ended. Archaeologists found her, thousands of years later, still holding that same position. Her arms are still around the child. It looks, at first glance, exactly like what you would expect. A mother protecting her son in the last seconds of both their lives, except that is not what happened. And we will come back to why, because the real answer is more remarkable than the assumption. For most of the human history, the ground was the one thing you never had to think about. It held you up, it stayed still while everything else in your life moved. An earthquake breaks that deal instantly, with no warning at all. So when the one certainty a person has ever known suddenly turns against them, what do they actually do? Here is why an earthquake hits differently than almost anything else in this series so far. Rain, at least, gives you time. You can see clouds building. An eclipse, believe it or not, can actually be predicted once you understand the pattern. But an earthquake gives you nothing reliable to go on beforehand. No smell, no change in the light. The ground simply moves, and by the time you notice, it is already happening. The Roman writer Seneca made almost this exact point in the year 62 after an earthquake struck the city of Pompeii itself. Long before the eruption, everyone now remembers that city for. He argued that the rarer a disaster is, the more terrifying it becomes, because people never get the chance to grow used to it. And it is not just frightening because it is sudden. It is frightening because of what it breaks psychologically. Every other threat in the ancient world came from somewhere else. A predator, a storm, a rival group. You could watch it coming, or run from it, or fight it. An earthquake comes from underneath you, from the one place you never thought to watch. You would think, given all that, ancient people simply accepted helplessness. Some did, but at least one person tried to build his way out of it. In China, around the year 132, a scholar named Zhang Heng built something that had never existed before. A large bronze vessel, about 6 feet across, shaped almost like a giant jar. Around its rim sat 8 dragon heads, each one facing a different direction, each one holding a small bronze ball in its mouth. Below each dragon sat a bronze toad with its mouth open, waiting. Inside the vessel was some kind of hidden mechanism, likely a pendulum, tuned to react to the faintest tremor in the earth. When it sensed shaking coming from a particular direction, the dragon facing that way would release its ball and it would drop straight into the open mouth of the toad below, with a clear metallic sound. Whoever was in the room would immediately know 2 things. An earthquake had happened, and roughly which direction it came from. This is now considered the world's first seismoscope, built almost 2,000 years before anyone else attempted anything close to it. And here is the part that makes the story worth telling. One day, one of the dragons dropped its ball. Nobody in the room felt anything. No shaking, no noise. Scholars at the court reportedly assumed the device had simply failed, or that this whole invention was nothing more than an expensive toy. Then, days later, a messenger arrived from hundreds of miles away, reporting a real earthquake in a distant province. It had struck at almost exactly the moment the ball dropped. The device had not failed at all. It had detected something no human being in that room could possibly have felt. The original device itself was lost long ago, and only written descriptions survive. Modern engineers who have tried rebuilding it have never quite matched the sensitivity those old records describe. Even so, the basic idea holds up. Someone, 2,000 years ago, looked at a threat he could not see coming and tried to build a machine that could sense it before any human ever could. Here is something else worth knowing. Long before anyone built a machine for this, people were already watching something else for warning signs. Animals. The oldest written record we have of this comes from ancient Greece, from the year 373 before the Common Era. According to the account, rats, weasels, snakes, and centipedes all left their burrows and fled the area, days before a major earthquake struck. People noticed. People wrote it down. That is the oldest surviving record of this exact observation, and it is over 2,400 years old. It was not only the Greeks, In Japan, an entire piece of folklore grew up around a giant catfish believed to live underground, said to cause earthquakes by thrashing its tail. It turns out real catfish do react to subtle electrical changes in water that can occur before some earthquakes, which is a strange thing for an old myth to have accidentally gotten right. In one of the most talked about cases in modern seismology, the 1975 earthquake in Huaicheng, China, magnitude 7.3, is sometimes described as the only major earthquake ever successfully forecast, partly because of unusual animal behavior combined with other warning signs. Officials evacuated the area beforehand. The earthquake hit almost exactly where and when they expected. Now, to be fair to the scientists studying this today, nobody has proven a reliable way for animals to predict earthquakes, and most serious researchers remain skeptical. But there is a real, tested theory for why some animals might sense something coming at all. Certain earthquakes may produce faint electrical disturbances or infrasound, sound too low for human ears, and some animals may be able to pick that up. So, when ancient people watched the animals and took it seriously, that was not superstition dressed up as observation. It might have been some of the earliest real science there ever was, built entirely on paying close attention. Eventually, watching was not enough. People needed an explanation for why the ground itself would ever turn on them. And across the world, in places that had no contact with each other at all, people landed on strikingly similar answers. In Greece, earthquakes belonged to Poseidon. Not just the sea, which is what most people remember him for, but the earth beneath it too. He carried the title Earthshaker, and when his temper rose, he was said to strike the ground with his trident, splitting rock and toppling cities. In Mesopotamia, the god Enlil, ruler of wind and storm, carried a similar responsibility. When the sky turned violent, the ground sometimes did too, and both were treated as expressions of the same divine anger. In Hawaii, it was Kanaloa, a sea god believed to shake the islands from below. In Japan, it was that same giant catfish, coiled beneath the earth, thrashing whenever it grew restless. And in Mongolia, the earth itself was believed to rest on the back of an enormous frog, trembling whenever it shifted its weight. Different continents, different creatures entirely, but the same idea again and again. Something enormous and alive lives beneath us, and every so often it moves. Most of the time, an earthquake destroyed a village or a town or a single city. But there is a theory, still debated today, that earthquakes may have helped end an entire age of human civilization. Around 3,200 years ago, over a span of roughly 50 years, a wave of destruction swept across the Aegean Sea and the eastern Mediterranean. Some of the greatest cities of the Bronze Age, Troy, Mycenae, Knossos, Ugarit, and the Hittite capital at Hattusas, all collapsed within roughly the same window of time. For a long time, historians blamed invasion, famine, or the mysterious raiders known as the Sea Peoples. But a geophysicist named Amos Noor, working with historian Eric Klein, proposed something else. They called it an earthquake storm, a sequence of major earthquakes, one putting stress on a nearby fault line, which eventually ruptures too, setting off another and another across decades rather than days. If they are right, it means some of the greatest civilizations in the ancient world were not necessarily conquered by an enemy at all. They may have simply been shaken apart piece by piece until nothing was left strong enough to hold together. It is important to say clearly that this remains one theory among several, not a settled fact. Even Eric Klein himself has said that no single cause, earthquakes included, was probably enough on its own to end that many civilizations at once. Drought, war, and disease likely all played a part too. But the idea that the ground itself may have helped bring down an entire age of human history is a genuinely staggering thought. Which brings us back to that woman and that child, frozen together for 4,000 years. For a long time after they were found, there was only one story anyone told about them. Every article, every caption, every description of the site said the same thing. A mother, in her final moment, wrapping herself around her son to protect him. It is the kind of image that explains itself. Nobody needed convincing. Everyone who saw it understood exactly what they were looking at. Then archaeologists ran a DNA test. The woman was not the child's mother. There was no biological connection between them at all. Think about what that really means. In the last seconds either of them had, with the ground failing and the walls coming down around them, this woman did not reach for her own family first. She reached for a child who was not hers, and she held on anyway. We do not know his name. We do not know why he ended up in her arms instead of someone else's. Maybe his own family was elsewhere in the village. Maybe she was simply the closest adult when the shaking started. What we do know is that in the most desperate moment of her life, she made a choice that had nothing to do with blood, and everything to do with refusing to let a child face it alone. That is not just a fact about ancient China, that is a fact about what people are willing to do for each other, even when there is no time left to think about it. 4,000 years ago, people feared earthquakes because they shattered the one thing every human being has always depended on: the certainty that the ground beneath your feet will still be there tomorrow. Today, we understand plate tectonics. We can map fault lines. We can build instruments that detect a tremor from thousands of miles away in seconds. But here is something modern medicine has only recently given a name to. Survivors of major earthquakes sometimes continue to feel the ground shaking for weeks or even months after the real danger has completely passed. Doctors call it phantom earthquake syndrome. There is no seismic activity happening at all. The ground is perfectly still, but the body does not always believe that, even after the mind fully understands it. We have learned what causes earthquakes. We still have not learned how to stop feeling them. Maybe that is because some fears were never really about understanding the danger in the first place. They are about how deeply we depend on the ground never giving us a reason to doubt it.